Hang on one second, I need to just turn the music off.
Can I turn off can I disable waiting room?
The reset.
Oh, really? Oh, you didn't do that?
When you reset, that just started playing. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty fascinating.
Okay, we're having a good time. How are you all doing?
Go to participants. Down here. And then, I would let that go completely, that screen. But to go to more, and see if you can just click enable waiting room. And then go to more and see if it did it. No, okay, that's part of your settings for the presentation.
Okay, so now I think I'm heard, right?
Yes, yes.
Great, thank you. So we're just still waiting now for more people to pop on in, and then I think the storm has passed. It was that the internet went off, just because.
So I don't
Okay,
know how to get
just
on.
hang on a second.
Oh, that's because I'm in the waiting room. I suggest unsharing the screen. It's going to be easier to see things.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that right now.
I'm in. Good, and I see the picture.
Great, okay,
Yeah,
we're getting there, we're getting there. Now if we can gather back in all the lost sheep. Oh, thank you all for your wondrous patience.
I'm just taking in these amazing statues. So
Yeah, well, the statues are a big part of this. Okay, so I'm just going to invite you all to kind of drop in for a minute, and we're going to do the same here. David and I are in the Star House and with our new friend Jake. You want to aim your
In a
computer?
moment.
And Jake made it up through the storm. We're happy about that. Oh, and while a few more people are finding their way back, yeah, I just want to invite us to the attunement of
Can't figure out
really
how to turn the
what
camera on.
is.
But I want to see Jake, right?
Oh, that's the thing, it may not be working.
Yeah, I tried then.
There's some more folks joining as well.
Okay, we're getting there.
That's in the way.
Yeah, well, that's supposed to do it, and it's not, so I can't explain why.
Okay.
It's worked that way every other time.
Okay.
See, it's showing here. You're just not seeing it.
It is.
It is. Okay, got a few more people coming in. So before we start, I think what I'll do is just share with you the altar. No, it doesn't look like we're connecting the way we're supposed to connect. I think something's gotten messed up, but you might see the little altar. We had our camera set up so that you could see the altar in the center of the room, which is basically the altar of the National Mall. But my camera is now not working correctly. This is great. So this may be some manner of reflection of what's going on in Washington, D.C.
If you turn off the screen share and get on this image, you can spotlight it for everybody.
I just pinned it.
And then you can spotlight for everybody. There you go.
There we go. Okay, there's Jake. Jake's left knee. And Jake. Hi, Jake. And then why don't you zoom in for a second on the, just get a little closer.
Fine.
So this is an example of the way we set up the mall. The way we set up the 4 directions around the obelisk in the center. And I ended up wanting to be able to bring this place to life in our meditation world and loving altar making. And the whole intention of this journey is to be able to come to the actual Washington, D.C. National Mall, to walk the mall, to experience all the busyness. This is the Goddess of Freedom in the East. She sits on top of the Capitol building. And to work with the principles of the 4 directions. And what we've learned so dramatically in the Star House around both invoking, opening the gates, bringing in the energies of earth in the north, air in the east, fertility in the south, and peace in the west. So I just wanted to orient you, and then we're going to introduce you to these 4 goddesses. So I think we're going to pause on that now, honey. Thank you. Okay, great. So I think everybody who was here is here, and just really want to welcome you to this place. Part of the beauty of Star House is being able to share the beauty of this place. So this is a way for us to take 2 minutes to arrive on the land so you can feel where the 3 of us are currently sitting and just enjoy the entryway. Here we go. So there we are. So the Star House is our teacher in so many ways. You were going to say a little more about 4 directions, 4 elements.
Yes. So we are near solstice, and the sun for everybody always sets in the west and always rises in the east. In the solstice, the sun is way up apparently to the north in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere as well. And in the summer and the winter solstice, the sun is, no, wait a minute, the sun is way down to the south or the north. There's a question about north and south, but there's always no question about east and west. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Point to where the sun is now for you. Just where is it setting? Where is it going down? That's the west. And it'll be up above from that, it'll be to the north of west. But that's generally to the west. And where the sun rises, point to where the sun rises. And if you can recall where it rises on equinox, spring equinox, autumn equinox, both the same place for the sun. That's due east. Some temples were organized so that the temple doors were only open on equinox days, equinox mornings, to take in that sunlight, that quality. When you orient to the directions, the Star House was oriented by sighting the pole star, perfect north, and at night. So it really takes its directions, the north to pole star. Pole star never moves. Every other star moves around the axis point of the pole star. One thing I could recommend is that at some point in your life, you spend 15 minutes awake. This is not lying down on a beach towel at the beach, not the same, quite the same thing, but really attentive and facing north, facing another 15 minutes facing east, 15 minutes facing west, 15 minutes facing south. Because the qualities are quite different. Perhaps many of you have been through a calling in of the directions, and sometimes that's painfully long-winded, and sometimes it is perfect, because there are intelligences connected with the directions. As humans, we whirl about. Trees don't. Trees know exactly which direction is which. The reason for the connection with directions is because the Star House is oriented that way, and so are certain special places on the earth, especially the National Mall of Washington, D.C.
So we are, as we mentioned, pointing out the altar, and thank you all who've been just quietly coming back on the call. You can certainly see, we'll send this out to you if you missed the very beginning. Our intention here is to share how the Star House and these 4 directions have taught us about the opening of the gates, and then how to transpose that pattern to the Washington Monument as the center point of the 4 directions and the monuments. So our intention for this night is to share that template. I want to really bow and feel my love for Anastasia Nutt, who's on this call, who she and I kind of emerged at a coincidental point or a synchronized point in time, having worked together for many years at Star House. And Anna's now on the East Coast, and we both realized, I'm going to say 6 years ago, that we were both being called back to something around the National Mall, and we did several trips there together, leading small groups and exploring and learning. So thank you, Anna. You know I adore you, and I feel like this work was co-founded by the two of us. David came to all of the trips, and as Anna's life got more busy, David and I are now doing the next ones. So we're going to move through some of these images to lay the foundation for us to have a couple of experiences around this material, around the altar, around, so this isn't all intended to be cerebral and just looking at words and patterns, but to actually find the way to make this night an experience. So one of the ways to start doing that is going to be to understand what is sacred activism. Obviously, it can be different things to different people. Our invitation is that each of us find our own way into this principle, that sacred activism frees thinking through sacred imagination, which according to the Gnostics is one of the greatest gifts that anthropos, or that the human being is gifted, the gift of sacred imagination. Imagining the pictures of the sacred, meaning that which is greater than the individual life, that which resonates with the sun, with nature, with spiritual archetypes. We all may have our own way of engaging with an archetype. We all come with our own spiritual path and understanding. We all have our own allies that we work with. And for a group to be as potent as can be, everyone needs to bring those qualities of alignment and attunement to the general universal principles that we're working with. So in this instance, that would be the 4 directions. It's actually the 6 directions with the above and the below. We'll talk more about that. And the within, the 7th direction being our heart. So sacred activism engages the actions of pure will, directed by the inner knowing that each of us carry as the sacred space, and held with equanimity. Meaning that we don't do this work from a political point of view only, though true politics is really people working for the good of the whole. And our intention is to kind of find the high note where we can all resonate. Before we go into some of the detail, I think it's important to honor the Native people of Washington, D.C., the Haudenosaunee, which were also known as the Iroquois, the people of the Longhouse, the 6 nations of that vicinity, the Mohawks, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, Cayugas, and the Tuscaroras, as well as the Senecas. We mostly know some of the myth of and stories of Hiawatha as the Iroquois. It's more complex than that, but Haudenosaunee is what the Iroquois Confederacy, the Native people, prefer to be called. And it's quite widely known that many of the founding fathers were influenced by this collective of these 6 tribes, 6 nations, because it's actually also understood that they had a true democracy. So we want to honor them. I also want to honor the people where we sit in Star House of the Cheyenne, the Ute, and the Arapaho, because it's these people who held sacred these lands and the lands wherever we sit. So moving from that, though there is a relationship to the Native Americans, which doesn't really show up all that much. I'll read some of the words here and then explain that a little bit. The discovery that there was a goddess of America or goddesses of America was surprising to a lot of people. There are many octaves where this is the story. There's kind of the goddess there sort of floating with the book, and it's more Columbia, as is the bottom right-hand corner. Columbia was kind of a politicalization of feminine energy, much like Britannia, and she was historically often seen related to Uncle Sam. When you look at the goddess the remaining goddesses. The Statue of Liberty, I think all of us recognize as one of the more powerful archetypes of the nation, a gift through the Masonic lineages, still standing there in the harbor of New York. Upper right corner is the goddess of freedom, who was down from the top of the Capitol for cleaning in the 1990s, and that's why she shows up the only time she's landed on Earth from being quite high up in the dome of the Capitol. She has quite a story. So, and the goddess of justice next to the goddess of liberty, the Statue of Liberty there. She's in front of the Supreme Court building. So why does it matter to even bring some of these images up? Historically, they have a place, but archetypally, it really matters. So when we turn our attention toward the unseen beings of this country, we can increase our awareness and our spiritual vision. And we can also find Sophia, or the sacred feminine, whatever name you may call her, as a principle in a meaningful way. I love this quote of Chris Bamford, who's no longer with us, was an editor and very involved with Steiner Books. And his introduction to one of the books of Isis Mary Sophia that he edited is one of the strongest statements of the spiritual feminine in a Western tradition. So I quote him several times in this presentation and thank the memory of Chris Bamford and all that he brought. The divine feminine is clearly present everywhere in the founding civilizations of our present moment. She's called by many names. The more one seeks, the more goddesses one finds, all of whom may be said to be aspects of Sophia, or of the sacred feminine archetype, representing different states of one and the same primal principle.
One and the same primal principle.
And this idea that the more one seeks, the more one finds, I love that. It's like to recognize that we find the goddess energies in each other, we find them in nature, we find them in the archetypes of stone, in paintings, in mythic traditions. All mythic traditions have a sacred feminine aspect, greater or lesser. So this is part of the principle and the premise that there is a primal principle of femininity, not gender. Feminine, masculine principles are really way greater than gender. We all carry aspects and values of masculine, feminine. So moving on to how do you work with your perception of the feminine?
When you look at our picture, I don't think we're spotlighted, it doesn't really matter. When you look at our picture on the screen, you say, oh, there's David, oh, there's Leela, oh, there's timber behind them. Turns out to be the ceiling of the Star House. And typically our vision streams out more than it streams in. We label the world every thousandth of a second. We relabel it. And that's vision working out. And we can easily say, oh, well, that's not really David and Leela or the ceiling of Star House, because I'm not there. I'm relying on this to give me an impression of what might be there. But the same is true of if you look around wherever you are right now, whatever room you're in, you look around and typically what you're doing is relabeling. There are good psychological reasons for that. I'm very interested in how you can get behind that. So you see something like this on the screen, which is sort of gently rippling these flowing through. Imagine this flowing through very slowly, like a broad, slow river. And within that, it's quite amenable to being labeled and relabeled because it's not changing very much. But then something else happens. So if you look closely, there can be aberrations or glitches. Imagine this shifting, so that actually it's as if someone, if you erected a large bed sheet vertically, and you had someone walk behind it, so you could just sort of see them moving through it, moving across it, and you just got hints of what their body looked like. That's how the goddesses speak. I'm going to suggest a little exercise right now, because it's right there for all of us to perceive. If you look hard, there are goddesses everywhere. So right away, I mean, we recommended that you bring paper and colored pens, at least a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. And if you don't have that, great, do all this in your imagination. But pick a direction, east, west, north, south. We oriented to the directions, just pick one. You can do any of them for today, pick one. Or pick peace, justice, freedom, or fertility. Peace, justice, fertility, freedom. And with that in mind, make a little invocation. We're going to have a little drawing exercise now for a few minutes.
So inviting you to close your eyes for just a second and deepen beneath the surface. Notice if you do feel an inclination to one of those four directions. But more important is to feel in this moment, do you have a perception of what goddess means to you in this moment? And does that arise? Can that arise as an impression of color? It might be a string of words. So just take 30, 40
shapes
seconds.
or geometries. Don't expect a fully dressed woman in red, white, and blue of the American flag. It's actually, that's a distraction. But like Leela said, to really orient to what impression comes to you through your hyper-vigilant senses.
What does goddess mean to you in this moment? So record that in some way.
Here you go.
Notice how you perceive it. Is it with a vision internal? Is it with a sensing, a knowing? Do you feel a different presence, a different kind of ripple in the space? Does it impact your heart? And however you have perceived her, invite her in to this moment, to this call, to this community, and really to this work for our nation's capital, for the land, for the earth herself.
Or are they done with the art now?
So we're going to invite you to continue that. If you didn't feel finished, you can do that. If you're a good multitasker, while we read a few more things about primal principle.
So go ahead if you want to do a little drawing now. now's the time. You have 60 seconds.
60 seconds, no rush.
Because it's simple impressions. Just the simplest of impressions is a huge breakthrough. And it comes through your projection out of labels. Something's coming from behind that can just give you a hint. And a hint is all you need.
And I'll quietly read a dedication to Sophia. All that matters, primal principle, begins with the sacred feminine. We call her Sophia. Though it's difficult to say who she is, wherever we turn, we see traces of her coming. As she draws near, much that was forgotten is re-entering consciousness, not only as memory, but also from the future as possibility. It demands that we rethink who we are, whence we have come, and whither we are going. So again, to feel how you feel her presence and let it come more brightly through you in this moment. When we do this work together around the altar of the National Mall, or really around any altar, but the focus tonight is the National Mall, it's because we act as vessels for her and vessels for sacred union between divine masculine, divine feminine. A modern depiction here of the Mother of the World, the heart of the dove and the essence of the Holy Spirit. So in Latin and Italian, dove translates as Columba, Columbia. This becomes a really important connection. So kind of tuning into this perception of the dove, the globe, the great Mother of the World, holding both. And how does that relate, this thread of connection? So one of the ways is the District of Columbia, Columba. This is an image in the southeast of the National Mall on top of the Smithsonian Building of Art and Industries. You can see on the right, the image is between the two gray towers that we see on the left. Beautiful, beautiful sculpture. So we want to take just a moment here to consider, I'm not quite sure even how to say this because this is a discovery for me, how much of this was intended and how much of this was artists and architects and with some Masonic influence, really intentionally creating all the codes and keys that we've found as we've been exploring this place. And my sense is some of it was clearly intended, and the most important aspect is that we can repurpose the symbology and the universal principles that are present. And we can talk more about this. We'll have more interactive time at the end. So for example, the District of Columbia was laid out as a 10 square mile diamond in the 4 directions. That is Washington, D.C. Before the damming, probably, right? We're not sure about that, actually.
I think actually Jefferson is in the right place. It's
Okay.
in the center is the National Mall, but the District of Columbia
Is this whole 10 miles square.
and what's around it.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Virginia and Maryland surround the District of Columbia. Yeah, I'm going to leave that just to your imagination. Why does that matter? Does that matter? Is this all part of like a, the idea of hidden in plain sight are the mysteries? And we in this country, for whatever motivates us, need to reclaim a connection to the sacred feminine. Do you want to read that?
The District of Columbia, a sacred space set apart. Very important. Throughout the National Mall, there are archetypes in stone, carvings, sculptures, monuments, reminiscent of the gods and goddesses of the mystery schools of old, the ancient mystery schools. These include archetypes of the goddesses of America. We'll go over all of these. This is kind of a lineup of a bunch of them. We will go over all of them at some point.
Yeah, these four here on the bottom right are the goddesses that we work with specifically, and we'll sort of tell you how they came to be. And these were just images that I really loved of the archetype. So we'll talk more about Lincoln up here in the left. And the winged horse. This is the statuary as it is in the dome.
The rotunda.
Looking in the rotunda, looking up to the dome in the Capitol building. This centerpiece here is called the Apotheosis of George Washington. It's a fascinating thing to have in our nation's capital. You can write that down if that's a new word to you. The Apotheosis of George Washington basically shows George becoming divine, surrounded by goddesses who represent the planets. It's an incredibly mythic painting, and it's right there in the dome. She stands right on top of it, outside
On the roof.
on the roof, and
Just
this is
above
what
it.
you look up at when you walk through the rotunda. So we come back to Star House. Some of you are new to Star House, and I just wanted to now emphasize these four directions and how we've worked with them here, and then we're going to go strictly to Washington. So this is how we have laid out the 12 zodiacal signs around the space. David and I currently are sitting in Aquarius, between Aquarius and Pisces here. We're sitting here, and we're set up in the very center. So these are the 12 signs, and then this is how we would imagine north, south, east, and west being overlaid basically on the floor, right? A little hard to do that and see the space, but this is the directions. As we've come to work with them, the 4 to the 12, focusing on the 4 seasons, focusing on the 4 elements, walking with the sun and the moon, as we deal with new moons, full moons, solstices, and equinoxes. So this is how those 4 directions work on the National Mall. The National Mall is not set up as a equal arm cross. That's important to say. You can still work with it because the directions are perfectly true.
And the distances are related to the phi proportion, also known as the golden mean, which we go into during our trip. We're not going to do that right now.
But the directions are true, very much so. I mean, if it were going to be a cross, the east would be right here to make it the equal arm cross. This backdrop is called the Macmillan map. It's a beautiful piece of art. I'm riveted by it. I feel like I'm looking at just a fantastic painting when I look at this early map. It's over 100 years old. And it does represent some of the intentionality of Pierre L'Enfant, who was one of the original designers of what has become the National Mall. So we see, and this is, again, an honoring of Anastasia's and my processes. We started to think, well, the National Mall is just seemingly filled with big chunks of marble that have turned into very masculine-like monuments. And the goddesses that we started to attune to the values of the wheel according to the directions that we work with in Star House, which also are related to the Celtic wheel. And that's to discern from different medicine wheels that native tribes use where the elements and qualities might differ. So if you work with a medicine wheel and they don't quite line up, that's because this is the way Star House was dedicated and the way the National Mall was dedicated. So that is fascinating to me, and you'll see those relationships as we go through this. So in the east, where the Capitol building is the goddess of freedom. Freedom being the quality of the East when you think of air and inspiration and, this sense of life. In the South, fertility is the goddess Ceres, very much related to the fires of South, to the fertility of, the high sun at noon, the growth forces of the earth, Ceres. And in the West, the goddess of peace, the energies of water, the flowing, nurturing quality of the West through water. And in the North, the goddess of justice, in this kind of concrete earth, in the strength of justice. The goddesses are not located in these directions, just to clarify that. They're assigned to these directions because their principles resonate with the quality of the four gates. And
That's part of the treasure hunt.
yeah, it's part of the treasure hunt. So the monuments obviously are fixed in space, and the goddesses, as we do the meditation that we work with, we just invite them as principles to move through the gate. And the exception being the goddess of freedom in the East. She very much occupies that place. So if you have questions and you want to kind of jot them down, we'll take some time shortly to answer some of them. But right now, I think if we lay out the whole map to give everybody the same foundation, hopefully it'll all start to make sense as we come together. So this is now laid out over the map as the National Mall now looks, quite full, quite busy, quite a lot going on. And these are the basic locations of the monuments. So in the east, this right here is the mall. You can kind of see the green line right behind, and then the north-south line here, and the Potomac here. So we're going to go through each of these just to give a little bit of an idea how, like the Capitol building, and the Goddess of Freedom, if we were in Washington, D.C., we would dedicate a day to going to the East Gate and to creating experiences together. In the Capitol, walking through the rotunda, I have a few images of when we've done that with the group, meeting the Goddess of Freedom, who lives in the visitor center. So here we are, east. Again, using the Celtic map representing air, Goddess of Freedom, the Temple of Freedom. Thomas Crawford was the sculptor of this amazing 17-foot bronze statue who stands way up on top. Many people, I won't say most, many people in DC have no idea who or what she is because she's very tiny when you're down there looking up. I can't remember how high the Capitol building is, 200 feet or something. And she catches, this is her facing east, so the sun captures her face when it rises. David mentioned this, and this is sort of an aspect of temple building. Architects and the designers of cathedrals throughout Europe would often orient the door to the temple to where the sun rose on the day of the saints' reckoning of the calendar. So the sun would rise and fill the cathedral
On that saint's day.
on the saint's day. So this is what happens in DC. The sun rises and lights up the east gate of the Capitol building. This is how she looks in the visitor center. This is the plaster cast that the bronze was made of. And to meet her and to be able to stand up on the mezzanine and get that close to her head, and you might notice what's on her helmet. What do you see, Jake? Stars and?
Above that,
An eagle.
an eagle.
An eagle. It just so happens in the east door of the Star House, we have an eagle in a stained glass window. So again, these kind of synchronicities were sort of fabulous for us to discover and keep discovering. So this was the plaster cast that was found in the basement of the Smithsonian after I read one quick little story in brief. I think it was the early 90s, that a kind of goddess worshiper type was from California, came to DC, and she heard this voice saying, "Get me out of storage." And one thing led to another, and the story goes that she really got very clear that somewhere this statue's plaster cast was in a basement somewhere. And it turned out it truly was. So because of this woman's intuition, they found it, cleaned her up, and put her in the visitor center. And it's just an awesome thing. Okay. Couple more images here just to give the perspective. So I want you to, the apotheosis of George Washington is right under the dome. So this is a close-up, and the painting is on the underside of this dome. I wanted to include some of the sculptures that are on the east gate of the Capitol. This is called Liberty and the Eagle. And it's in relief with what's called the genius of America and the spirit of hope. And these kinds of things, these are archetypes in stone. They're found everywhere. It's amazing.
A statue is quite important because by its existence, it is an invocation, a non-stop invocation to a particular quality. The gestures are particularly important. Sometimes the accoutrement, the accessories are really important, but most important, and it takes time to actually penetrate into the statue to feel its essence. So much in Washington, D.C. can be understood from the metaphor of a candle and a moth. Mm-hmm. The whole Capitol building sits atop a sacred piece of earth. That's the candle deep down in it. Everything that happens in that building is like the flapping around of a moth. And the same with any particular object created for its power, such as a statue. There is a flame inside, but we're usually attracted to all the flapping about of the wings of the moth.
So this is another image. She's quite large, but in the context of the dome ceiling, she also is in the Capitol building. It's another version of Liberty and the Eagle. This is another picture looking up at the apotheosis of George Washington in the upper left, looking directly up from here, which is the rotunda. Okay, so this is our group walking through the very center of the rotunda. If any of those people looked up, they would see this image on the top. This is a hall of memories, hall of statues and incredible paintings. And then there's this very sweet spot, which actually you are not supposed to walk through the middle. And so far we've been able to ignore that directive every time we've been there, just because it's remarkable to be, then you're in the center of the dome in the Capitol. And this I just loved. I mean, look at that image. Here are these three lovely goddess ladies with all these guys. So this is all part of the inner workings of the Capitol, the rotunda, the Hall of Statues, and while it looks like we're being tourists, we are part-time tourists and part-time really doing some invocations and clearing around these patterns. So sacred activism. And this is part of, just as a teaser, I think David said we'll
teaser.
include this. I don't know how many people would actually see this if they were looking at the Capitol. I'm now starting to see it because this is the pattern we build in the Star House with a meditation we do. And it is a relevant pattern of spiraling double tetrahedra and the toroidal fields creating an energy generator. So it's part of the sacred activism that those of us who are working with this map will bring that to the east around the dome. So we're going to move to the south.
The South, fertility. The monument is to Thomas Jefferson. Actually, you can just sort of see this. I wrote a book many years ago, actually, called The Scythe Book, Mowing Hay, Cutting Weeds, and Harvesting Small Grains with Hand Tools. And I quote Thomas Jefferson repeatedly. He was an avid farmer and he thought through best farming methods. And he was really eager. He wanted there to be small farmers. You have the small farmer quote coming up? Great.
So before, it's the next image, but this is just to put everything in place here. So here's Jefferson's, basically, well, I have a picture of the Pantheon. This is the building. You see his statue there in the silhouette. Very, very strong image. He's quite tall, 50 feet maybe, something like that. When you're standing in front of him, he goes on and on. And this is the goddess Ceres. She happens to be at Union Station, and it's a beautiful image of her holding a scythe, a sickle, and shafts of wheat. So these are the principles. Again, I'm just going to repeat this a few times. This is what's physically there in the South, and she is a representative of what flows through the gate of the South, through the goddess or the quality of fertility and Ceres.
A community of small farmers, land property owners, will be the only assurance that the freedom our republic offers will be guaranteed to each and every citizen. He encouraged that there be many small farmers, and each one finding a way to interact with the fertility of the land, of this new land.
So think about that when you think about, okay, where are we now? One of the strongest movements going on around the world, and certainly in this country, is restoring food security through smart farms, and regenerativity and sustainability of, knowing where your food comes from. For those of you who saw Hamilton, part of what was the undercurrent of that piece was that Hamilton and Jefferson were really at odds with each other, quite a lot of conflict, because this was Jefferson's idea. The assurance that freedom of our republic will be guaranteed to each and every citizen has to do with food security. And Hamilton kind of went the route of what became Wall Street in a whole different
Agribusiness.
way. Yeah. So Jefferson really belongs in the South because of his commitment to fertility. Now, I just want to do a parenthesis here. There's also a lot of noise and truth and projection in the system and conversation right now about the founders as slaveholders. And just to say, we're very aware of that, and it's not a conversation we're going to have in detail right now, and it's a conversation that needs to happen because it's part of where we come from. It's part of what was going on when this country was being founded. And there's to wrap around all that is to wrap around all that and start coming to grips with it. But after a lot of study and reading, I have to feel that this man was remarkable for his time and for his vision. And yes, there's a shadow side. This is, I loved it, isn't that cool? So the top left is another view of the Jefferson Memorial, which is modeled very specifically after the Parthenon, the Pantheon in Rome. The Pantheon, which was basically the temple of all the gods. Again, another sidetrack of where did these designs come from? Why were they, like the strongest features architecturally are Roman, Greek, and Egyptian in the National Mall. This being the Roman one. These are all parts of our heritage. The part that isn't represented and given anywhere near due credit is the Native American and its presencing in the process. I will say that the Goddess of Freedom has to do with a Native American root. If we have a chance, we'll go back to her. She basically is draped in a Native American garment and standing in the east as sort of the place of birth. It makes sense that she would have a strong presence of Native American.
Into the west.
So the Lincoln Memorial with the Goddess of Peace, this area, if you can see the cursor moving between the obelisk heading to the west, is all water. It's the reflecting pools. You've seen them on TV shows and overviews of the mall. Also the World War II Memorial, all water in here. This whole western arm is water, which leads me to believe that the founders and designers were working with the Celtic wheel.
The element of water, Celtic wheel.
Very important to know that both equinox and autumn equinox and spring equinox on that east-west line is exactly where the sun rises on both equinoxes, right in the perfect east, shines perfectly down the mall, picks up the obelisk, and they're the only 3 days in spring equinox and autumn equinox when Lincoln Memorial is lit up with sunlight. So here are the principles, Westwater, the Goddess of Peace, the Lincoln Memorial, and Lincoln the Man. This is the Goddess of Peace. She actually is a little run down as a statue, which a lot of people have noted, given we're not exactly in a peaceful time on the planet. This statue is not being well cared for. It's very prominent in the mall. And this image of Lincoln, I think, captures something of what the man had to deal with, and just the horrific role he had to play. In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. Again, a very powerful monument, if you've not been there, to see his words in stone. And this is the Parthenon that the Lincoln Memorial, this is the Lincoln Memorial under construction. And I thought, well, those images really do look a lot alike. That this was, the Parthenon is Athena's temple, and Athena, so I mean, clearly these were choices that, again, the builders and designers, and mostly the Masonic Brotherhood, made in choosing the Greek house of Athena as the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of earth, and of war. Not the goddess of peace, goddess of war.
The north, the White House, and the goddess of justice. Element earth.
So again, this is what's in the north, and she actually is the energy and the gatekeeper outside the Supreme Court, which is sort of northeast. So the other aspects of the White House in the north are ancestors and elders, past, present, future. The fact that this was sort of the home of presidents and of the West Wing as the functioning of this arm of the government. And it does relate to ancestors and elders. We've done 2 tours through the White House itself, which is getting harder and harder to do as time goes on. And people who were born and raised in DC said that used to be you could just walk up and walk in. Now, oh my
7
God.
security checks, 7 security checks.
Yeah, with dogs and metal detectors and guys with guns, and I mean, it's just not what it was, certainly before 9/11. But it's a fascinating thing. Again, we've probably all seen pictures of it in, replicas of TV shows. But it's really something to stand and walk in some of these locations. I just want to go back there for a minute. So we were up, I think it was up here in this room.
Yep.
With this group, kind of being good tourists. And we suddenly came to a place where there was a perfect round, circular kind of mandala on the floor. And it looked directly, the windows are facing directly into the center, so directly to the obelisk. And we all just we had chosen directions, and we all just kind of silently moved in those directions, had on sunglasses and whatever, and we're just sort of doing prayers of peace and justice and, feeling ourselves as vessels in this movement of being in the White House. And within 30 seconds of standing there, all of a sudden guards came out, shut down the doors and said, "We're sorry, ladies and gentlemen, the tour is now over." And we were like, huh.
I think we looked a bit too serious.
But moments like that are really fabulous, because you start thinking, oh, maybe maybe what we're doing is actually being felt. Maybe not appreciated, but being felt. Okay, so going to the center, this place, back to Columbia, the center, the Holy Spirit, the dove, and the obelisk. 555 feet tall is
And
this
5
obelisk.
inches.
And 5 inches? I don't think I knew that. 555 is understood as the number of the goddess. So we kind of assigned Columbia herself, the District of Columbia, it feels like connected to the Holy Spirit of the dove, belongs there. These are just some wonderful paintings that are quite celebrated as when this was being designed. Washington was not alive, and these are works of art, and this is probably more true to the time when the design was determined. But it really, they had different designs for him, being on a horse and a big pyramid and things like that. And it landed with the obelisk, which you can in fact go up an elevator and be at the very, very pinnacle of the pyramid up here. So when the sun shines, this is the east face right here to the right. This is the reception hall or the visitor center entry. So this part of the obelisk is fascinating. It will receive the morning light on a bronze plaque under, I think it's under the stone, are the words Laus Deo, which basically means praise God. And it was intended that the sun would strike this place every single morning, and no place in DC can be higher than this, 555 feet. If you go to other cities now, you find a lot of buildings that are higher than that. Can't build higher than that. So it's a pretty amazing sacred imagination that this became it also functions as a sundial. There's lots of books written about the mysteries of how DC works as an altar. Again, how true they are, it's hard to say, but the sun at different times of year will strike this and it will point at different things around the mall. And that in itself is another whole possible study.
Let's ponder these words, relating Sophia to sacred activism. Chris Bamford, again, offering insight in his introduction to Isis Mary Sophia, which is a collection of Rudolf Steiner lectures. It's a long introduction. Chris Bamford was famous for his ability to understand Steiner and bring it into the present. Here we go. A new mood is abroad, a kind of heart's yearning for what Sophia has traditionally always provided, which is a seamless vessel of harmony and meaning, uniting heaven and earth, within which we may live, move, and have our being. What we need now is something that places spirit once again in the heart of our existence. Sophia gives us this ethical directive, calling upon us to sacralize, consecrate, make spiritual the whole world and all our lives.
So this really is a call to action, right? To take some responsibility. And I think that's sort of the heartbeat of this for us, is like, what was something bold and in a way very unexpected that we might be able to bring from what we've learned at Star House into our nation's capital, ultimately for the good of Sophia, for the good of the earth. Just a couple more images and then we're going to have a little time to talk. So sacred activism, sacred, again, our definition, meaning aligned with something greater than the human being, aligned with the creators and sustainers of earth, sun, cosmos, of nature. That we bring, each of us, with equanimity, what we define as sacred into an activism, which one feels pulled out of one's self-focus into a greater self, capital self, eventually into the full potential of becoming and being fully human, which is the definition of anthropos, being fully human and contributing to creation.
Hear from Vladimir Solovyov, who wrote about the Divine Sophia in several powerful writings. Here's one. Let it be known today, the divine feminine is descending to earth in an incorruptible body, in the unfading light of the new goddess. Heaven has become one with the depth. And from Chris Bamford.
And Sophia is a still evolving mystery. Both these things true. These Russian Sophia lovers were very, very powerful, and Soloviev is one of them.
And do a thought experiment for a moment. It's actually really important that no human being can fully apprehend the totality of Sophia, because it is greater than ourselves, and it gives the growing impulse for us to mature and become, and in this school for souls called Earth. We will talk about why are we at the Martin Luther King, which is also on the mall. It's between the Jefferson Memorial, it's the southwest, between the Jefferson Memorial to the south and the Lincoln Memorial to the west. And you can pass by this amazing, and it's right on the Potomac River, so it's right against the water. But if you imagine this big block of stone that you see, that's the scale in the back, you see a person standing there. If you imagine this big block of stone with Martin Luther King sliding back, it fits exactly into that mountain of stone where you see the two sides of the mountain. And it's just an astonishing sculpture. And he really talked about mountain and really how I have been to the mountain. The really powerful individual, and you can see the bottom right is one of 50 different quotes incised into the walls of the granite as you go around the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial.
So we wanted to give you the context of these next images of sacred activism. Some of you on the call may have been at this event in October 2022. We are at the monument. You can see it in the back here. We're facing the Jefferson Memorial across a beautiful lake. It's just a glorious spot. And this was a different kind of sacred activism. It was a one-day event rather than the 5 days that we normally do at the invitation of the Anthroposophic Society to open their general meeting.
Everybody's pointing to Venus, by the way.
Pointing to Venus, and David had worked out some of Martin Luther King's speech according to 8 directions. We laid out and talked about the goddesses of America and bringing Sophia back into the awareness of people and back to them all. So we had a group here. We did a training, which is what we just saw, and then we went we're in front of the Lincoln Memorial now. And basically, I think there were 40 of us there at this moment. This is standing in front of Lincoln, looking at the obelisk, and further 2 miles down is the Capitol building. And we did eurythmy for Sophia and for Columbia, and it was a remarkable moment. It's like there was a stillness. There was probably 200 people standing around, as Lincoln's memorial is very populated. But it was, again, an example of a group of people just deciding we're going to pulse out appreciation, love, divine for this whole creation and bring it to the National Mall. This is a way of artistically trying to capture, given the mall is huge, and this pattern of the lemniscate, this figure 8, geometrically speaking, is called a lemniscate. And this is part of what we do in the activation, is that we envision that we're standing at the center initially, and we open the gates, invite in east, freedom, south, fertility, west, water, and north, earth. And then we each take a position in the practice of the 5 days together as we visit each, and then people choose. Let's go back there for a second. Choose one direction.
For the last day.
Yeah, and we actually we have our iPhones and we kind of link up together, and then we do this lemniscate pattern using the obelisk as the center point. And we sort of coordinate with a number of people in each of the 4 directions, this pulsing of connection, and then bring it from heaven down deep into the earth through the obelisk. So this is our last slide, and then we'll talk a little bit. So we are doing this next event on October 17th to the 22nd. David and I will be facilitating, and you can get in touch with us. We sort of encourage people, if this is all kind of new, we have an online course that's a 21 lessons that I'd be happy to take a group through together that goes into, I mean, you can kind of tell we could keep talking a lot and a long time, because this material is so rich, and there's so much to explore. So if anybody's interested in we could start a group maybe in the end of July for 7 weeks and kind of.
Or you can go at yourself.
Yeah, you
it's
can do it at your own
self-paced
pace.
as well.
But sometimes it's lovely to have a group to go with. Okay, here we all are. So,
Are you asking for people's goddess drawings? Are you asking for
yeah,
people's
let's just see, there may be.
discoveries?
Yeah, I'm asking for like whatever wants to happen
Whatever
next.
wants to happen, what's the goddess going to ask people to say or do? Is that it?
Yeah, sort of like that.
Okay.
I did have one, oh, there was an inquiry, somebody asked on the chat who's standing on either side of Columbia. It's actually science and industry. So those are the two statues beside Columbia. Okay. So I think you can unmute yourselves. Let me make sure if somebody could try, and if not,
Or raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
yeah.
The raising hand is down under reactions at the bottom of your screen, and you can click on reactions and do raise hand, and we'll see that, and then we'll actually ask.
Can somebody unmute and just see if it works?
I don't think they can. It's
Yes, well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
okay.
Okay,
Yes, they can.
good to see you.
Rose, Perma Rose. Oh my gosh, there you are. So speak, would you? Let me see if we can hear you.
Okay, so this has been fantastic, you guys.
Okay, hang on, we're not hearing you. Keep talking for a minute.
This has been fantastic.
There you are, great.
Okay.
And something that I have delved into peripherally, not peripherally, but somewhat in depth for many, many years myself, and just been so drawn to what is happening energetically around Washington, the District of Columbia, the sacred sites, etc. So I'm so glad you put it together so beautifully and so enlighteningly. Really appreciate it.
Great, thank you. It's lovely to see you.
Likewise.
So if anybody wants to share anything of their experience with the feminine, the goddess energy, or questions, I mean, this is really kind of open opportunity now, so.
Debbie Grace has raised her hand, but you are unmuted. So Debbie Grace, would you like to speak?
Oh, yes. I love you too. You rock
Great
in
to
every
see
possible
you.
way. So I honor and celebrate first and foremost who you are as a couple, and with Anastasia, as the Trinity of birthing this vision, because it is what the mystery schools had requested all along for Americas, I am nations, and I felt the womb of Sophia in DC with you quite palpably, because I did the incredible introductory video that you did was like 19 minutes, very well mapped out and explained, and yet you're in Star House, so I'm with you in my heart and my womb and my belly and all that good stuff there on the land there in the mountains above Boulder. So she, like you said, is the primordial principle, and all these different faces of the goddess energy, all her different aspects, for me is just bringing back the Adi Shakti, the principle of life's resilience, and that we literally do require, quite honestly, all the different facets of the divine feminine powers to restore the life-giving principles, because as Maria Gimbutas has said, in the language of the goddess, she is creation, and that's the embodiment of love, which is the whole point of Anthropos. So, you guys are geomancy, sacred activists, and taking it to that part of the nation where most people have associated with politics and bringing in these ancient planetary tantra principles. I mean, I just felt John Lash with us. He would be just like so proud. This really, you're doing a planetary tantra retreat.
That's good, I like that, I like that.
Yeah, thank you for the way that you're holding the medicine wheel, the Celtic wheel of life, the mother's womb, and Sophiana's legacy. And it begins, right? We're what we call our backyard. If we don't bring her back here, then, where can we remember her? And so thank you, I'll
Yeah,
get back there
Yeah, good.
to Colorado eventually, but it's like I'm with you today. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to see you and hear your articulate expression. And just to say that taking all that and wrapping it into like a group process.
It's very powerful.
Yeah, and like what do we all need to do that'll start to activate? I mean, when you think about politics and the upcoming election and what's happening in the Ukraine and what's going to be the financial reality in this country 5 years from now. I mean, all these issues are politic, right? And they're all what the people feel more and more both confused by, disempowered to have any impact over, confused because our political process, who's telling the truth, what's the truth, what is the media, all these things like have gotten to be so noisy.
So we actually opt for actual experience. The ability to know that your compatriots that you've worked with for 4 days are at the other of the 4, and you're at one of those sites. And with a small group. So small groups at each of those places, but coordinated in time and practicing a meditation that we've learned together, which is very open. And it's actually serves to remove the labels that I talked about earlier. Remove the labels and actually go into the stream of the flow of the earth lifting in that place with its gifts.
Yeah, and also to realize that this isn't, about, well, now the only thing to do is come on the journey. That's not the point. That's an option, and you're all invited for sure. But we weave this work into some of the online phone calls that we do on a regular basis, because it's a practice, and the group of people that seems to be blossoming and flowering around a shared practice, and then focusing, sometimes it's on DC, sometimes it's on, environmental disasters, sometimes it's on war zones, to keep developing a way to bring this kind of a practice into a real life conversation.
Yes.
So that's part of where Star House is, one of our favorite sayings is that we're rooted here. We've learned by this temple's teaching, but it's relevant everywhere.
Rooted here, relevant everywhere.
And take the principles in other places.
Do you want to share anything? If you want, you can sit here.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Does anyone else would like to share some of your insights, experiences?
Questions? You do have to unmute yourself.
Or raise your hand when we can help with that.
Be bold.
Prema Rose, I think you can unmute yourself. If you can't within a few seconds, I will.
I can. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things I wrote down, and I went into justice. And to me, it was really interesting that it was the White House that held that. And but then one of the things I wrote down was possibility. And then that's what you said was possibility. So it's one of the things that I connected in with, because I think anything at this point, we're on such an edge, a crux here of possibility. What can happen from here on? Because everything is shifting drastically, tremendously. And what is our own individual piece in all of that? And, the possibilities that each of us hold to be able to create the next iteration of what we call America.
Yes. The politics often is like those flapping moth wings, and we're really interested in actually not being distracted by that, but going to the candlelight deep down under and behind.
Yeah, and some of these quotes speak to exactly what you said, you know, that we're only really limited by our own imaginations as to what's possible. And if in fact we are all here with the possibility of genuinely helping make a shift, a significant shift, then it also requires that we step up and find the ways to do that, to remember how when we're vessels and operating out of being, you know, not wanting to manipulate or make something happen, which is really, that's an important principle for me, that we're not trying to make something happen, we're opening up a flow because humans have some accountability and responsibility for all that's kind of gone off the tracks. And by standing there and saying, okay, fill me, you know, let me be a vessel for one of these directions in this moment, something starts to move. And I think for me, it's like I've learned a lot about letting go of a need to control what's going on, or even to know what's going on, and just to kind of practice being a vessel with a gate open behind me. And sort of, you know, I tend to stand mostly in the east when I do this practice, because of freedom is like one of my most important values, spiritual freedom down to the ways it can express, you know, through a life. And those have been amazing moments, and they kind of defy a lot of words, because you know, it's like one of those moments you're just holding with the equilibrium and open heart, and actually end up energized rather than exhausted by the process.
One of the reasons to visit Washington, D.C. with preparation is that there are some of the most negative spirits flying around that place that you can find. And the knowing where they are and knowing how to work with them is really helpful. And you need to learn a little bit beforehand, but certainly as a trainer. And when you're open to this candle flame that really inspires the whole, and when to be protected and shut, and when to be a bit of both. So that is, it's a great training ground. It's like a multifaceted Disneyland, but it's not all sweetness and, hi, how are you doing? No, it's got very many characters that are active there.
Right.
That's an understatement.
It is an understatement. It really is. I mean, that's partly, you know, like I don't, it sounds like to some people when we do this presentation that we're kind of, you know, holding the Masonic Brotherhood, you know, at a lofty level. And like, you know, similarly to the shadow side of the founders and that time in history. I think that the Masonic Temple, which is directly, by the way, on the North Line, directly behind the White House, and over a third of the American presidents were noted Masonic brothers, and George Washington was the Grand Master of the Masonic movement when he was president. So there's no question they've had an influence. And there's no question, as an organization, they have a shadow side. I don't know a person or an organization without that. But I'll call it an intuition. My intuition is that at the heart and core of the Masonic movement, there was a group that really had the future in heart and mind, and a vision. And were they alive today, they may not be holding the same vision they held, you know, 200 plus years ago. But there was something that moved through them to construct this place. And like any creation, it happened on, you know, many levels. And I don't actually think every Mason everywhere holds the same values as some that had the pure intention. So just saying that, because they, geometries, this is another interesting factoid. In the National Mall alone, there are over 33 zodiacal wheels. We didn't include any of those in this presentation, but we have photographed a lot of them. That might look like the floor of the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
Beautiful
Whoa.
sigils, like the 12 zodiacal sigils, they're called, the symbols and artistic interpretations are on the floor surrounding a beautiful sunburst in the very center. In some of the buildings that senators and the Congress meet in, you see around the edges, like where the lights are behind us, right?
Up in the ceiling.
Right, that place in where wall meets the ceiling, where all the astrological signs are there. Congressmen mostly have no idea what they are. So 33 of them. And the book David Oveson wrote, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation Capital. David's no longer with us either, but quite an esotericist, and he made a point of traveling to cities all over the world in search of where is the kind of the mystical heartbeat. And he said he's never seen anywhere near this number of reflective esoteric principles in any city. In Paris and in London and some of the hearts of European culture, there might be 5 obvious zodiacal wheels, but not 33. So one of the summaries of his work was that he reached the conclusion beyond a shadow of a doubt that Washington, D.C. was dedicated to the stars. I love that. And I think it's also open to interpretation.
Well, when they say, please lay the cornerstone of this particular monument at 10:59 a.m. Now, 10:59 a.m. alerts the builders to, it wasn't around 11, it was 10:59. Why? So look what is happening at 10:59. Spica, the goddess star, is rising in the east. So the interconnection with the stars, we love that at Star House. It makes another whole series of connections between the Star House and Washington, D.C.
Spica is in the sign of Virgo and has been understood for several thousand years.
Virginia.
Virginia. So all these things, they're not coincidence. I think they're intentional at some level.
They're meant to be found and meant to be penetrated through patience.
Sabrina, are you unmuted because you'd like to say something?
Well, I'm not sure I have anything relevant to say. I'm very new to this whole project. I'm drawn to it because I believe in the power of it. And I think that to lift these currents up, especially for the young people, so many young people go to DC to work, to be interns for politicians, and they come with high ideals.
Yeah.
So the idea that what they're met with is the unenlivened forces, I think takes the refreshing energy out of their creativeness, what they want to offer to in service. And so I find it to be an exciting thing. I mean, I hadn't really paid attention to what this was about until yesterday when I got my email. The other thing that I would say is I did turn to the north, and I think you had us do this experience before you described the connections, and I don't know what they are before that. So my experience of north was was the two words that came were, well, actually a feeling of strength and truth.
Mhm.
I don't know where that comes relative to justice. Justice, I didn't know that yet. And blue,
Hmm.
which is, well, not water, but not the color water, but a really balanced
Yes.
feeling that comes with blue. So
No,
I
that's
thought
lovely.
that's what we were doing.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And I think that's a wonderful kind of intuitive exploration. We lost a little bit of time in our kind of technical snafu in the beginning.
And it's getting late.
Yeah, and we're going to wrap up because we're at the time of wrapping up. But thank you for that, because I think that sort of the next step is like to feel into, I will send the recording to everyone, and some of you may have some of these images and maps. But with the recording, you can stop and, sort of look and tune in a little bit more. Because it's a way in. It's a way into a somatic, participatory, active visualization. And that may be all that one needs, to kind of unfold, like, well, what am I curious about here? What do I want to know more about? And then if anybody does want to pursue this in a living way, to come on the tour is just, it's some combination of a whole lot of fun, a fair amount of work, and a cultural immersion in really one of the truly more remarkable cities on earth.
Yeah.
The Library of Congress itself is considered one of the most beautiful buildings in the world.
The National Gallery is
National Gallery, amazing treasure of art. So
it's a great place to train in the four bodies of the human being, which we do.
So we've been refining a way of like making a kind of practical gesture towards spiritual anchoring of these principles of the feminine. And in truth, those can happen in any city of the world. I have a dream of, being able to just do tours around Boulder within the same principle of the 4-gate template. Just to start being more geographically, geomythically connected to the places we live, and to be working in small groups. And so some of that is addressed in ways to take this not just to Washington, D.C., but to places where you live. So I think maybe we'll say goodnight.
Yeah.
And if there's any other burning question or comment, we'll take another 30 seconds. Anna, did you want to
No,
say?
I was just going to say thank you. It was very enlightening, and for me, hopeful that we might be able to awaken some of the divine feminine energy. We've heard of the founding fathers, and we've heard of all of this, and we need to bring a balance. And it's nice to hear that this is in your minds and in all of your minds. So we'll have to see now how we commit to doing the work.
Yes.
That's what we have to do. Thank
And-
you.
And I noticed that Goddess Columbia has a sword. In light of the things that are going on today, I think that we women need to remember that we too can carry the sword.
Yeah, it's sheathed in her statue, but it's there.
Yeah, ready. Yeah, thank you so much. It was
Thank
very,
you.
very interesting.
Thank you, Martha. I appreciate it. Okay, friends, let me just go back to gallery here so we can see everybody. And just wish you all a very sweet, restful time. And thank you for joining.
And the more
Thank you.
Thank you.
the more
Good
you
night.
look, the more goddesses you'll find.
That's right. I love that statement. The more you look, the more you find. And they're all expressions of the primal principle, whatever you choose to call her.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll send this.
Aho.
I'll send this out in the next day or so, so you'll have it as a resource. And yeah, just deep, deep appreciation. Maybe we could just close with an inhale and an exhale, and just envision, as you might have when you were connecting to the goddess exercise, was it drawn to a direction or maybe to the center? And reviewing the map and our little altar at Star House here, to weave the east to the west, to weave freedom to peace through a figure eight, a lemniscate, and to weave fertility to justice, north to south, to open the flow to these great gates, the great beings who come through these gates, the archangels and the elemental energies of earth, air, water, and warmth. And to thank those who've shown up to assist us in this inquiry. And thank each and every one of you. And wishing you a very fond good night. Bye.
Arrivederci.
Good night.